for me, the importance of my work is not gender or just about gender. I use gender to illustrate a whole slew of things. Different ways of thinking, different ways of possibility, the impact of colonization, and how deep that colonization was. If it introduced a different way of thinking called gender. One of the first things I learned about gender and about women's subordination was this idea that one of the ways in which women are belittled and made smaller and subordinated is for men to make sure that they are segregated and far apart from women as possible. If men are one thing, then women must be the opposite. They don't share anything. That is one of the marks of this. But I pointed out at the time, I said, this is interesting, because in my language, this is not happening. Rather than men and women being divided and pushed apart, in fact, the categories are not gendered. They are referred to by the same word. We don't have a word for brother or sister. We'll say my older sibling or my younger sibling. People don't say my son, my daughter. They say my child, my offspring. So I said, even our names, we're not gender specific. I said, so this contradicts that whole idea that societies want to keep men and women apart, I said, in the Yoruba family. And I felt that language was a place where it could be easily verified. I think in terms of Africa and Afro descendants and Africa in general, what invention brought to the table is that we have a lot of valuable knowledge. Too many Africans don't believe that we have knowledge to impart. And that's why in our discussion yesterday, I repeated the quote from Professor Archie Mafeje, who was an activist against apartheid, and he was also a scholar. And he said, what sorts of knowledge do Africans have, and how do we access it? It is important to know that we have knowledge, that we are worthy, and that, as I always say, we must think and theorize from where we are standing. Unfortunately, too many of us theorize from the perspective of the colonizer rather than our perspective. I want to say that sometimes even the comparison is not between African women on the continent and African women in the diaspora, because even African women on the continent are different. And I say that because as a West African, one of the wonderful things about my education in the last decade was the year I spent in Zimbabwe, and then I spent the following year in South Africa. And Southern Africa was different. And one of the things that many South Africans are surprised by, and maybe unconsciously so, is that they are surprised when I said that, you know, we don't have white Nigerians. In West Africa, we didn't have settler colonialism because they were not aware of it consciously. And that the implications of that are so different in terms of organizing for now and organizing historically. So there are quite a lot of parallels between South African women and African American women. And indeed, Afro descendants in Catalan, Africans, Black people, in a place where if white people are not the dominant in terms of demographics, they are dominant. And so you have to respond. And whatever you do seem to be overly shaped by the presence of white people, by the presence of white women, by the presence of whiteness in ways that you do not see or feel in Nigeria or Senegal. However, this is not to say there's no racism, because racism is global. It's in the water we drink or the water we cannot find. It's in the fact that we cannot eat. It's in the fact that our economies are upside down everywhere. So I'm not taking away from that. But in terms of the specificities, we have to take some of those other factors and how they interact with each other, and they shape what is on the ground. That question of who is worthy of life and whose life should be protected has come very much to the fore, given the wars that are going on today, whether in Gaza or Ukraine, because the tolerance that we all have for 41,000 dead Palestinians speaks to that issue of who is human and who is not human, whose life is valuable and whose life is not valuable. Frantz Fanon talks about that because the idea is that to those who hold power, whether the imperialists or the colonizers, the people they colonized, the people they conquered, were not seen as human. So you have the human and the non-human. So some people, if only 5 of them are killed, we change all the rules at the UN and whatever. And some people, thousands are killed and we're all watching. So that is a huge challenge for African women, because we're at the bottom of the totem pole in terms of the global hierarchy of who is worthy, who is not, and the stereotypes. Because if one is stereotyped, you can't come into the room and be allowed to make a case for yourself or to introduce yourself. People know you already, and they know you in terrible ways. So that is one of our biggest struggles, so that we will create space to be able to speak for ourselves, act on our own behalf, and resist, and resist.